Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. In military life, silence is louder than noise. On September 23rd, 2024, Matthew Johnson didn't show up, and he never explained why, because he couldn't. Matthew was the kind of man you noticed only when something was off. A logistics technician with the Utah National Guard, he wasn't loud or attention-seeking. He was routine. He showed up early. He double-checked supply manifests. He ate the same lunch. And most importantly, he never missed formation. That's what made it matter when at 07 hours on Monday, September 23rd, he was absent from roll call. No call, no email, no explanation. A field sergeant tried reaching him, then a commanding officer. Then someone from Human Resources called his emergency contact, his wife, Jennifer Gledhill. No response. By the next morning, with 2 consecutive no-shows and still no contact, the Utah National Guard flagged Matthew as unresponsive in the defense personnel system. He hadn't applied for leave, hadn't used his swipe card on base, and hadn't logged into any secure channels. According to his records, he had simply stopped existing. Protocol kicked in. A welfare check request was filed. The Layton Police Department received the directive mid-morning, September 28th, 2024. Officers arrived at a single-story residence in a quiet residential cul-de-sac just north of Salt Lake City. No visible signs of struggle. No neighbors had called in disturbances. Matthew's white Dodge Durango was parked in the driveway. The lawn was cut. Mail had been brought in. Porch lights timed correctly. Jennifer answered the door. Calm, clean, no tears. She invited the officers in and explained, without being prompted, that her husband had stormed out after a fight about 4 days ago. She assumed he needed time and didn't want to escalate things. She hadn't reported him missing because, in her words, "I thought he'd come back when he cooled off." It was an answer that didn't sit well, not because it was overtly suspicious, but because of the lack of specificity. She didn't mention what the argument was about. Couldn't name the time he left, didn't reference a phone call, a bag packed, or even what he wore when he supposedly walked out. She said she was tired. The house was spotless. The scent of disinfectant still hung in the air. Officers noted several anomalies during the walkthrough. The master bedroom mattress had been replaced. Jennifer claimed the old one was soiled and she'd taken the liberty to dispose of it herself. There was no receipt for the replacement, no record of trash pickup, and no trace of the old bedding. The carpet beneath the bed was slightly discolored. When asked, Jennifer responded with, "I used bleach. My husband had night terrors. Accidents happen." In the garage, Matthew's vehicle hadn't been touched. Key fob sat in a dish near the entryway. His phone was missing, though Jennifer said it had probably run out of battery. Officers checked every room, opened closets, looked under furniture. There was nothing overtly criminal, but something about the silence felt staged, familiar even, manufactured. Police didn't make an arrest. They had no grounds, but they opened an active missing persons case within 30 minutes of exiting the home. A detective was assigned, and within hours, military liaison teams were syncing timelines. Matthew's last confirmed action was a text sent on September 20th at 11:12 p.m. to a fellow guardsman. "She's acting weird. If I don't show Monday, check on me." That message alone reframed the investigation. This wasn't a voluntary disappearance. This was premeditated fear, the kind that only emerges when someone knows what's coming, but has no way to stop it. Detectives reviewed external surveillance. The house had 2 cameras installed, one at the front door, one facing the driveway. Both had gone offline on September 21st, around 2 a.m., according to router logs. When asked, Jennifer said, "I think there was a software update or something. I didn't mess with it." Inside the home, nothing electronic remained from Matthew. His laptop, gone. His personal firearm, missing. Jennifer said he took both when he left, although she had no answers as to why he wouldn't bring his truck or wallet. A request for banking records showed his debit and credit cards had 0 activity since the 20th. The last transaction was a $46 gas station purchase 3 miles from Hill Air Force Base. On September 29th, detectives requested a geofence warrant for the Johnson residence. Data from nearby cell towers would later confirm that Jennifer's phone remained at the house the entire weekend. Matthew's phone, meanwhile, last pinged at 4:31 a.m. on September 21st for 37 seconds, near a state highway exit outside Davis County. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services began preliminary interviews with the couple's three children, ages 5, 7, and 11. Though too young to fully comprehend the implications, one statement stood out. The middle child, a boy, mentioned that Daddy's bed got thrown away because it was red. When asked to clarify, he simply said, Mommy said don't talk about it. By October 1st, Matthew's case was reclassified from missing person to suspicious disappearance with potential foul play. Jennifer remained uncharged. Investigators lacked a body, a cause of death, and a confirmed crime scene. But they had something else, a pattern. The house was too clean, the timeline too thin, and the victim, by all accounts, too disciplined to just vanish. The lead investigator's log included a single line written in the margin. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. When something terrible happens in a home, it usually leaves a mess of some kind, physical, digital, psychological. But in the Johnson residence, the evidence was backward. Everything was too organized, too aligned. That was the issue. By October 2nd, 2024, the case had officially transitioned to the Major Crimes Unit in Davis County. The initial patrol report from Layton PD flagged several unusual conditions inside the home, but none met arrest thresholds. Now, with data warrants active and forensics in motion, investigators began reconstructing Matthew Johnson's final 72 hours using what couldn't be wiped: metadata. Step 1 was the digital timeline. Detectives pulled location data from Matthew's last known Google login. According to device telemetry, his smartphone disconnected from Wi-Fi at 2:16 a.m. on September 21st and registered a GPS movement spike just after 4:30 a.m. The device pinged a nearby tower once, highway adjacent, rural, just north of Syracuse. Then it went dark. His vehicle, a 2022 Dodge Durango, had a telematics subscription, activated through Uconnect. That system showed no movement at all, no ignition signal, no door unlock. The truck had sat motionless in the driveway since 8:12 p.m. on September 20th. He hadn't driven anywhere. Next was Jennifer's phone. Law enforcement accessed her Google account through a court-approved warrant. The data showed consistent in-home Wi-Fi usage from September 20th through 23, aside from one critical window, 3:02 a.m. to 5:19 a.m. on September 20th. During that period, the device disconnected from the network and traveled west toward the border of Davis County. It reconnected just after sunrise. She didn't mention that trip in her original statement. The route history showed a pause near a secluded access road, no cameras, no commercial infrastructure, and no reason for anyone to be there at that hour unless they were dumping something or meeting someone they didn't want documented. Drone footage of the area, gathered days later, revealed disturbed soil and tire compression near a dry ravine. Officers marked it as a priority grid for cadaver dogs. The next step was communications. Investigators pulled Jennifer's call and messaging logs. There were no outgoing calls to Matthew after September 20th. No texts, no voicemails. She hadn't even attempted to reach him since the night of his disappearance. When asked, she said she figured he needed space. The behavior didn't align with any other spouse in any other missing persons case detectives on the team could recall. Then came the banking data. Matthew's checking account showed no activity since the gas station transaction logged at 6:45 p.m. on the 20th. Jennifer, however, received 2 incoming transfers from her father between the 18th and 20th, totaling $1,000. One Venmo note simply read, "You sure?" She hadn't disclosed that to investigators. Inconsistencies compounded fast. The oldest of the 3 children, an 11-year-old girl, had been staying with relatives since the welfare check. In a closed-session forensic interview conducted by a child psychologist and a sheriff's deputy, she disclosed something chilling. Mom threw out Dad's phone. She said nobody should find it. The device was never recovered. At the same time, forensic analysts returned a partial toxicology screen on a stained section of carpet collected from the master bedroom. Trace residue of oxycodone was identified, along with diluted blood plasma. The lab couldn't match the blood sample to a full profile due to breakdown, but mitochondrial DNA analysis suggested a male contributor. Investigators requested a match against Matthew's military DNA registry sample. Meanwhile, the home's smart speaker, an Amazon Echo Dot, provided surprising input. With a subpoena, investigators retrieved audio interaction logs. At 3:07 a.m. on the 21st, the device registered the following command: Alexa, how deep is 6 feet? It was asked only once. There was no follow-up, no recorded answer. From an evidentiary standpoint, this moment changed the case's status. It was no longer a question of missing, it was about intent. Still, there was no body. And without a body, every step forward had to be surgical. Detectives revisited Jennifer's initial statements. Her timeline was beginning to unravel. She had claimed Matthew left the home on foot, in anger, possibly suicidal. But the electronic trail didn't support that. No search queries from his account, no activity from his devices, no outbound movement of his truck. A man doesn't walk out of his life in 2024 without leaving a digital echo, unless someone shuts the signal off for him. The working theory among the investigative team, at this point, was not whether a crime had occurred, but how long it had been premeditated and whether someone had help covering it up. By October 5th, Davis County Sheriff's Office submitted an affidavit seeking a warrant for property search beyond the Johnson home, specifically the ravine area where Jennifer's phone had paused in the early hours of September 21st. Search and recovery units began preparing for excavation. By the end of the first week of October 2024, investigators had built a framework of digital inconsistencies, physical disruptions, and behavioral red flags. But without a witness, without someone who could place a hand on the moment it all unraveled, it remained a puzzle with no centerpiece. That changed when a man walked into the Layton Police Department and asked to speak with a detective. He introduced himself as someone who used to be close to Jennifer Gledhill. The name wasn't listed in the case file, not a neighbor, not family, not a coworker. But within 5 minutes of sitting down, he volunteered information that was not public, not suggested, and not the kind of detail a person would guess. He said Jennifer had told him that Matthew was gone, not missing, and that she didn't expect he'd ever be found. The man was not looking for immunity. He wasn't confessing to a role. He had documentation, texts, audio recordings, location pings. He agreed to speak with detectives under recorded conditions, and that interview produced a turning point in the investigation. His relationship with Jennifer, he explained, had been private. They met online. He'd never visited her home. Most of their communication was through encrypted messaging and voice notes. According to him, things escalated emotionally in August, just weeks before Matthew vanished. Jennifer had confided that her marriage was ending and that he didn't know how dangerous Matthew could be. At first, the informant, whose name was redacted in all released records, thought it was just someone venting. He kept the chats, but didn't intervene. Then, days after Matthew was declared missing, Jennifer contacted him again. This time, her tone was different. He played detectives a voice recording, time-stamped October 1st, 2024. In it, a woman's voice says, "I told you what happened. He found everything. Texts, emails. It was going to get ugly. So I ended it. I had no choice." Her words were calm, no whisper, no hesitation. In the background, a faint humming could be heard, consistent with the air circulation from a vehicle cabin. Forensic audio analysis later confirmed she had recorded the message while driving. Likely during the same period her GPS showed movement toward Davis County. The interview continued. He said Jennifer had asked him to help dispose of something big. She didn't use the word body, but she offered him money, told him to bring a shovel. He declined, said it wasn't a joke, and that he had screenshots to prove the exchange. One message read, "If you're not going to help me, don't make this harder." The implications were severe, but the timing was crucial. The conversation occurred 4 days after Matthew was reported missing. The man hadn't come forward immediately, he admitted, because he was afraid. But after seeing media coverage and speaking with an attorney, he decided to submit his statement voluntarily. Investigators now had an inside source who could connect motive, timeline, and method without prompting. They secured a warrant to extract metadata from the informant's phone. Location history confirmed he was never within 5 miles of the Johnson residence during the critical window. He was ruled out as a participant, but his data gave the team something they didn't yet have: context. They now knew Jennifer had communicated about the disappearance in a past tense voice. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hoping he'd return. She knew. More importantly, they had corroboration. Several statements Jennifer made to detectives, claiming she never talked to anyone about the disappearance, that she had no support system, were contradicted by verifiable evidence. It wasn't just that her timeline didn't add up. She was actively manufacturing a parallel one. Law enforcement shifted into surveillance mode. Detectives began mapping every public place Jennifer visited. They analyzed her vehicle movement, financial transactions, in-store camera feeds. One recorded instance at a local home improvement store, dated September 23rd, showed her purchasing heavy-duty trash bags, a tarp, and gardening tools. She used a debit card registered to her own name. Back at the Johnson residence, search teams conducted a second forensic sweep. This time, cadaver dogs were brought in. One of them alerted to a specific section of the garage wall near the tool bench. Investigators drilled through a sealed panel and recovered a plastic container containing fabric with suspected blood residue. Testing later confirmed partial DNA matching Matthew Johnson. That container, along with the recorded statement from the informant, shifted the case from circumstantial to prosecutable. But again, there was still no body. Prosecutors advised restraint. No charges would be filed until the physical remains were recovered. But internal consensus had formed. It was now a matter of assembling the most irrefutable case possible. And if that meant waiting, they would wait. For now, every new discovery added another layer to the evidence web and tightened the circle around Jennifer Gledhill. In the margins of a report dated October 7, one detective wrote, "There's no room left for coincidence. She's writing the narrative, but we're building the record." In any missing person case, there's a point where probability outweighs hope. By October 10, 2024, law enforcement in Davis County had passed that threshold. With no confirmed sightings of Matthew Johnson in over 2 weeks and growing evidence that directly contradicted his wife's account, the focus of the investigation shifted, quietly but definitively, from rescue to recovery. The area of interest had been defined with precision. Using Jennifer Gledhill's phone geolocation logs, investigators isolated a narrow window of movement between 3:02 and 5:19 a.m. on September 21st. The route traced a westward path out of Layton, turning off a paved road into a loosely maintained service path near a dry ravine. No homes, no businesses, no cameras. Just a clearing bordered by brush and runoff channels. Satellite imaging from the Utah Department of Transportation, combined with drone sweeps conducted by the sheriff's aerial unit, highlighted an anomaly in the soil near the north edge of the clearing. The grass was disrupted in a circular pattern. Ground temperature data suggested heat displacement in that zone around the time Jennifer's phone disconnected from her home Wi-Fi. Search warrants were expedited. Cadaver dogs were deployed in grid formation over a 200-yard radius. On October 12th, one of the dogs, a Belgian Malinois trained in late-stage decomposition detection, alerted on 2 separate passes, first near the brush line, then at a shallow dip in the terrain approximately 30 feet west of the original soil anomaly. That second alert triggered immediate action. Excavation began the following morning under full evidence protocols. Soil samples were collected in layers, with photographs and geospatial tags recorded every 10 centimeters. At 1:17 p.m., search teams uncovered a stained section of tarp wrapped around what appeared to be layered bedding material. No human remains were visible. The item was double-sealed and transferred to the forensic lab at the state crime facility. Lab processing took 72 hours. The bedding included a queen-size fitted sheet, 2 pillowcases, and part of a foam mattress topper, consistent with missing items from the Johnson household master bedroom. Luminol testing confirmed latent blood presence on multiple layers, and mitochondrial DNA extraction from the blood matched Matthew Johnson's profile in the Department of Defense registry. That was the first biological confirmation that Matthew had been injured, if not killed, in the home he shared with Jennifer. Further analysis identified transfer stains consistent with partial body contact, but no traceable bone fragments or tissue. Investigators interpreted the evidence as secondary disposal, an intermediate storage solution, not the final burial site. The absence of remains recentered attention on the garage. Cadaver dogs returned to the Johnson property under a renewed warrant. This time, they alerted not to the tool bench or trash bins, but to the southeast wall near a ground-level vent. The drywall was intact, but a faint chemical odor was noted. Non-commercial grade oxidizer, commonly found in surface disinfectants, but also in blood clot cleaners. Structural analysis identified a recently patched vent duct. When the panel was removed, a secondary airflow space revealed plastic storage lined with odor-absorbing silica. Inside was a heavy-duty contractor bag, partially filled with latex gloves, rags, and a disposable paint tray. Trace testing confirmed high concentrations of blood plasma and male tissue residue. Again, a DNA match to Matthew. The pattern now had direction. Matthew Johnson had been injured or killed inside the home. His body had been temporarily stored or handled in the garage. Some biological evidence had been moved off-site, but not all. The question shifted from whether a crime occurred to what had been done to conceal it and whether those efforts had been carried out alone. Prosecutors reviewed the collected evidence with forensic counsel. The threshold for a no-body homicide charge had been met under Utah law: clear motive, premeditation indicators, direct contradiction of statements, and multiple forensically confirmed blood sources. Still, the DA's office advised holding off on formal indictment until one final search was executed. A new grid was drawn, this time incorporating the elevation models from LiDAR scans conducted over the Davis County wetland corridor. Specific points were prioritized based on floodplain patterns, areas where a hastily concealed body might shift or settle. On October 20th, searchers uncovered a large plastic storage tote submerged near a seasonal retention pool. It was sealed with duct tape and weighed down by loose stone. The tote did not contain a body. It did, however, hold a ballistic-grade mattress cover, multiple articles of men's clothing, and a pair of size 10.5 military-issue boots, registered to Matthew Johnson during his last deployment. Embedded in the grooves of the boot soles was soil matching the lot behind the Johnson home. The forensic trail now spanned 3 locations, 2 time frames, and multiple containment efforts. None of them suggested panic. The method was linear, progressive, intentional, and it wasn't over yet. One line in the October 21st forensic field report stood out, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. Residual patterns indicate deliberate decomposition staging. Containment suggests advanced planning for evidence separation. In other words, the cleanup wasn't reactive. It had been anticipated. By mid-October 2024, investigators weren't just looking for physical traces. They were looking for behavior, choices made before Matthew Johnson vanished. And while bloodstains and discarded bedding built part of the case, prosecutors knew intent often left quieter, less visible trails. The search turned to money. Jennifer Gledhill's financial activity hadn't raised immediate red flags. She hadn't made large purchases post-disappearance, hadn't drained joint accounts. But the pattern changed when detectives looked backward instead of forward. In the 30 days leading up to Matthew's disappearance, Jennifer's Venmo and bank history revealed several unexplained movements. She received 3 deposits from her father totaling $1,000, recorded as travel, house stuff, and one with no memo at all. In isolation, they meant nothing. But one deposit landed less than 36 hours before the night Matthew was last seen. She didn't mention that in her interviews. Investigators then examined store receipts linked to her loyalty accounts. On September 19th, she purchased gloves, plastic sheeting, a mattress cover, and odor control powder from 2 different hardware chains, paid in cash. Security footage confirmed her identity. She was alone. At the same time, GPS records tied to her phone placed her vehicle circling suburban back roads near Davis County at 2 a.m. on September 21, something already confirmed in Chapter 4. But what changed here was the layer of intent. Jennifer's transactions weren't made under stress. They weren't reactive. They predated the crime. Patterns of concealment before the fact are rare. But when they exist, they dismantle the defensive panic. Detectives expanded the digital review. Jennifer had searched topics on her tablet related to decomposition timelines, odor control in enclosed spaces, and methods of sealing drywall. Most of the queries came in after midnight. days before the reported disappearance. The search history had been manually wiped, but cloud backups restored the full list. When confronted with the forensic analysis, she refused to comment. Investigators also pulled her email metadata. Buried among shopping receipts and promotional offers were two messages from an encrypted temporary email account. One sent on September 22nd, referencing a done job, and another confirming an order for industrial-grade cleaner from a third-party vendor. That shipment never reached her home, but the purchase was verified. The final link came from a mobile carrier ping. Jennifer's phone made a short call on September 21st to a number registered to a burner phone purchased 3 weeks earlier. The voice call lasted under 30 seconds. The recipient was never identified, but the device was later located, discarded, battery removed, found in a public trash bin 6 miles from the Johnson home. It had been wiped clean, except for timestamp metadata, aligning perfectly with her trip to the ravine. None of these actions on their own confirmed murder, but in context they painted a clear trajectory. Jennifer had anticipated the need to erase something, and she had prepared. In small communities, the idea of someone planning this far ahead while still attending PTA meetings and grocery shopping as usual is disturbing. But criminal intent doesn't always show up with red flags. Sometimes it hides behind receipts, in quiet browser tabs, and inside gift wrap rationalizations. What broke the silence wasn't just what Jennifer had done. It was the calm with which she did it. By the third week of October 2024, the investigative scope extended beyond Jennifer Gledhill. The evidence no longer pointed to a single actor. The cleanup, the concealment, the coordination, it all suggested assistance. Not after the fact, but parallel to it. And when detectives mapped the timeline again, one pair of names surfaced repeatedly: Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, Jennifer's parents. Their involvement wasn't dramatic. They didn't leave fingerprints on weaponry. They weren't captured on surveillance dragging trash bags, but their digital footprint intersected key moments that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. Bank records showed Jennifer's father wired her $700 on September 19th, noted only as, "You need to handle this." A second transfer from Rosalie followed 24 hours later. No transactions had been noted prior for months. These weren't routine gestures. They were timed. Phone records placed both parents at Jennifer's residence between 1 and 3:30 p.m. on September 21st. The same afternoon, investigators believed cleanup operations were underway. According to Jennifer's initial statement, she had been home alone all weekend, but license plate recognition hit on a black Toyota Camry registered to Rosalie Gledhill entering the neighborhood that Saturday. There was no record of that car leaving the property for nearly 4 hours. During a follow-up interview, the Gledhills admitted to being there, but said they were dropping off groceries. The statement lacked credibility. There were no purchases tied to their cards on that day, and no bags or perishables were visible in the home during the first police walkthrough. Further, surveillance from a nearby home, reviewed weeks later after a neighbor submitted video from their Ring system, showed Thomas unloading a rolled-up item from his trunk and carrying it into the garage with Jennifer. The object, approximately 6 feet in length, was wrapped in what appeared to be plastic. In the video, he wore gloves. This evidence prompted a sealed warrant for the Gledhills' home. During the execution, forensic technicians recovered a stained tarp from the garage attic. Blood testing confirmed it belonged to a male individual, and a subsequent mitochondrial DNA match linked it to Matthew Johnson. The Gledhills were brought in for questioning but refused to provide further comment. It was no longer about whether they helped, it was now about what they knew and when. The forensic report also noted that a mattress topper matching the set recovered near the ravine had been cut at 2 seams. The missing sections corresponded with pieces found inside the Gledhills' burn barrel, charred but still identifiable by embedded fibers. When confronted with this, Rosalie requested legal counsel. Prosecutors began drafting a conspiracy case. There was no direct evidence they had participated in the death. No witness testimony, no confession, no traceable communications planning the act. But the post-crime timeline was damning. Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill had moved material, they had destroyed property, and they had been present repeatedly during windows that coincided with concealment and obstruction. Investigators reviewed neighborhood canvassing interviews again. One neighbor mentioned hearing hammering sounds from the Johnson garage around dusk on the 21st. Another recalled seeing the older couple load their vehicle with garbage bags that same evening. None of it was reported at the time. Most thought it was part of the couple dealing with a separation. In reality, the family wasn't breaking apart. It was closing ranks. And behind that silence was a consistent truth. The effort to cover up a crime is rarely spontaneous. It's often rehearsed, distributed, rationalized, especially when families involved. By late October 2024, the evidence against Jennifer Gledhill and her parents was substantial, but incomplete in the eyes of the court. The primary problem remained: no recovered body, no official cause of death, no confession. And under Utah law, charging homicide without a corpse is legally viable, but procedurally complicated. The district attorney's office reviewed more than 400 pages of lab findings, GPS logs, search warrants, and digital communications. Prosecutors focused on what could be proven, not what was implied. The standard was beyond a reasonable doubt, and every decision moving forward had to anticipate trial cross-examination. That meant sequencing the strongest evidence first: physical transfers of Matthew Johnson's blood, verified pre-planning behavior by Jennifer, and post-event obstruction involving her parents. The goal was to prove intent, opportunity, and concealment in one uninterrupted chain. They didn't need a confession. They needed coherence. In cases like this, forensic integrity is everything. Prosecutors brought in external criminalistics advisors to confirm chain of custody documentation. The stained bedding from the Davis County ravine matched the missing mattress from the Johnson residence. Fibers from the container found in the wetland matched fragments collected in Jennifer's garage. The blood recovered from both scenes matched Matthew Johnson's military DNA profile. The sequences were tight. The timeline held. At the same time, witness statements were re-interviewed under sworn testimony. Neighbors confirmed they had seen Jennifer's parents making multiple visits to the property after Matthew's disappearance, but before any missing person report was filed. One witness noted a trash can, too heavy for one person to lift, being loaded into a vehicle. A second, unrelated witness described a sour chemical odor near the garage for about a week. In isolation, those details were circumstantial. Together, they formed prosecutorial momentum. The DA's office requested a grand jury on October 27th. The panel convened in private. Over 4 days, forensic experts testified to blood volume thresholds, scene reconstruction, and probability metrics of survival given the evidence recovered. 2 cadaver dog handlers presented search logs. Analysts explained the GPS drift data and the smart speaker interaction, asking, "How deep is 6 feet?" And investigators walked jurors through Jennifer's web history, line by line. The grand jury voted unanimously to indict on November 1st. Jennifer Gledhill was arrested that afternoon. Charges included first-degree felony criminal homicide, obstruction of justice, abuse or desecration of a human body, and conspiracy. Her parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, were each charged with obstruction and evidence tampering. Jennifer offered no statement. She was processed, booked, and held without bail pending trial. Media coverage broke immediately. Utah woman charged in husband's disappearance ran across major outlets. The absence of a body dominated headlines. But inside the courtroom, the absence of Matthew Johnson's voice didn't weaken the prosecution. It focused it. They weren't proving what happened in vivid detail. They were proving that it could only have happened one way: that Jennifer, supported by her parents, had planned, executed, and concealed a fatal act. And every digital trace, every receipt, every smear of blood was a piece of that design. For prosecutors, it was not about spectacle. It was about control. And controlling the narrative in a no-body homicide requires strategy. Avoiding weak witnesses, structuring physical evidence early, and never overstating conclusions that science can't support. That balance mattered more than drama. Back inside the case files, the lead investigator inserted a single comment into the final briefing. "We don't need a body to speak. The evidence already did." By early November 2024, Jennifer Gledhill was no longer under suspicion. She was in custody, formally indicted for the murder of her husband, Sergeant Matthew Johnson. Her parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, were charged as co-conspirators in post-crime obstruction. And though Matthew's body had not been recovered, the case had moved forward, quietly, deliberately. There was no spectacle in the courtroom, no public outbursts, no confessions, no dramatic reversals, only paperwork, motions, statements read aloud in dry legal cadence. Prosecutors had prepared for resistance. Defense attorneys focused their energy on undermining procedure, contesting search warrants, arguing chain of custody on the mattress, questioning the reliability of cadaver dogs. At every turn, they avoided addressing the core fact. Matthew Johnson was gone, and the only consistent element in the timeline of his disappearance was Jennifer. The state of Utah doesn't require a body to prosecute murder. What it does require is narrative integrity, each piece of evidence building logically to the next without breaks in reasoning. In this case, despite its physical gaps, had an airtight structure. Jennifer's search history, phone records, and late-night trips couldn't be explained away. The blood matched. The tarp matched. The lies about being alone unraveled under basic surveillance footage. And her own words, captured on a recorded call, disqualified any plausible innocence. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution introduced the Alexa voice log. "Alexa, how deep is 6 feet?" That wasn't a coincidence. It was intent, documented digitally, stored in the cloud, retrieved by subpoena. No emotion, no ambiguity. Jennifer remained silent in court. Her legal team argued that the case was circumstantial, that absence was not evidence, and that without a body, the possibility of a staged disappearance or suicide couldn't be ruled out. But the judge didn't need a body. He needed proof of impossibility, and he had it. Matthew hadn't used his bank accounts. He hadn't contacted his family. He hadn't used his car. His military pay remained untouched. His last known action was sending a message that implied fear, not escape. "If I don't show Monday, check on me." That message, though brief, defined the heart of the case. Back at Hill Air Force Base, his unit held a remembrance ceremony in his absence. An empty chair stood in his place, flanked by folded flags and 3 small photo frames, one for each child. The military had already recognized his death as service-connected, not because he died on duty, but because silence in a soldier's life is never normal, especially not a soldier like Matthew. The children now live with their paternal aunt. They attend school under new last names, sealed for privacy. Court documents confirm supervised contact between the children and their maternal grandparents has been suspended indefinitely. As of June 2025, Jennifer remains in jail awaiting trial. The defense has filed multiple pretrial motions, including attempts to suppress forensic evidence, but the judge has allowed most of it to stand. The body of Matthew Johnson has not been recovered. Searches continue along the Davis County Wetlands Corridor, expanded in early 2025 based on new drone mapping and seasonal water recession. But physical closure remains elusive. Despite that, the case stands as a rare example of forensic architecture functioning without a final visual. Not because the system worked perfectly, but because it refused to depend on one moment of discovery. In Utah's legal system, the law acknowledges what families often know before prosecutors do. That absence, when paired with deception, is evidence of something far worse. And in this case, everything pointed back to a home that had been scrubbed too clean, too fast. There's a tendency in true crime to wait for a final image. Bones recovered, confessions made, verdicts read. But justice doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's built on fragments, on timelines, on contradictions that don't go away under cross-examination. In this story, the absence of a body didn't weaken the case. It amplified the silence. That silence now belongs to Jennifer Gledhill. She will stand trial in late 2025, facing charges that do not require a corpse, a weapon, or even a witness to the act itself. Only the truth that followed. And sometimes that's enough. What this case taught me is simple but sobering. Not every ending brings closure, and not every truth waits to be uncovered by perfect evidence. Sometimes it's the small consistencies, the quiet data points, the instincts that won't let go, that reveal what really happened. If you're watching this and feeling unsettled, you're not alone. Stories like Matthew's remind us to look closer, ask harder questions, and never take silence as safety. If this video resonated with you, Share where you're watching from, or tell me what part struck you most. And if you didn't like it, I still want to hear from you. What didn't sit right? Let's talk about it. If this kind of storytelling matters to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next.